My grandfather left me a small orchard, a beautiful stretch of land that had belonged to our family for generations. To me, it felt like a hidden sanctuary. Whenever life in the city became overwhelming, that place gave me somewhere to breathe again. Every weekend, I would drive out there and spend my time caring for the apple and cherry trees. I'd trim branches, check the soil, and enjoy the calm that came with being surrounded by nature. The quiet countryside air and the gentle rustling of leaves were a perfect escape from the constant noise of urban life. But there was one problem. My orchard happened to sit right next to a newly built, upscale housing development. And like many developments like that, it came with a very strict homeowners association, an HOA that was known for being extremely controlling. Fortunately, my land wasn't part of their community. My property stood independently, which meant their rules technically didn't apply to me. Unfortunately, that didn't stop them from trying to involve themselves in my business anyway. At first, the trouble came in the form of letters. The first complaint they mailed me was about the height of my grass. Soon after that, another letter arrived criticizing the color of my old barn, claiming it didn't match the aesthetic standards of their neighborhood. I ignored them. After all, it was my land, not theirs. I had no obligation to follow their rules. Apparently, that answer didn't sit well with the head of the HOA, a woman I'll call Karen. Karen had crowned herself the unofficial ruler of the neighborhood. To her, my independence seemed like a personal insult. Whenever she drove past the orchard, she'd slow down her car just enough to stare at the property with clear disapproval. She especially seemed to hate the rustic wooden fence and the slightly untamed look of the orchard. Before long, her complaints became even more ridiculous. One letter claimed the buzzing from my beehives violated noise regulations. Another insisted that the smell of blooming apple blossoms was too strong and unpleasant for nearby residents. Yes, she was literally complaining about the scent of flowers. Then one bright Saturday morning, I arrived at the orchard and immediately knew something was very wrong. The entire property looked like chaos. A massive herd, close to 100 cows, was charging through my land. They were trampling the grass, snapping low branches, and devouring the young saplings I had recently planted. Some of the smaller trees were already completely flattened under their hooves. My stomach dropped. Years of careful work were being destroyed in front of my eyes. Panicking, I grabbed my phone and called the sheriff's office. While I was explaining the situation, furious and overwhelmed, I noticed someone standing near the gate that led into the HOA neighborhood. It was Karen. She stood there with her arms folded, watching the destruction with a smug little smile on her face. That was the moment I realized this wasn't some random accident. The deputy arrived not long afterward and helped track down the owner of the cattle, a local farmer who looked just as confused as I felt. According to him, he had received a call earlier that morning from a woman claiming to be me. She had supposedly asked to rent his herd to help clear brush from the orchard. The description he gave of the caller was vague, but there was one detail that stood out. The phone number she used came from a disposable burner phone. Still, the farmer remembered something important. During their conversation, the woman had mentioned she was part of a neighborhood committee and that she wanted to teach a lesson to a neighbor who refused to cooperate. At that moment, everything clicked into place. The deputy took notes and documented the situation, but he warned me that without a direct confession, it would be difficult to prove Karen was responsible. Meanwhile, the damage around us was devastating. My irrigation system had been crushed under the cows' hooves. Dozens of young trees were destroyed. The ground had turned into a muddy mess filled with deep hoof prints. When I later calculated the repair costs, the estimate was staggering. Well over $50,000. I knew I couldn't let something like this go unanswered. My only real option was civil court. So I started gathering every piece of evidence I could find. The farmer statement, the long history of harassment letters from the HOA, and photos showing Karen standing nearby that day with that same smug expression. When I showed everything to my lawyer, he felt confident we had a solid case for both property damage and harassment. We filed a lawsuit against Karen personally and against the HOA as an organization, arguing that as president she had been acting on behalf of the association. Their first response? Laughter. Their attorney sent a letter dismissing my claims as ridiculous and even threatened to countersue me for supposedly damaging the community's reputation. They assumed I was just some hobby farmer who spent weekends playing the dirt. They thought I'd back down. They were wrong. At that point, it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about holding them accountable. And the fight had only just begun.